I'm gonna push this live.
All right. Are you going to record this too?
I am, and I will send it to you. And I want to say hello to everybody. We are on our Thursday night conversations with Commodores. And as we've been doing for about a year now, every Thursday night, I have these just awesome conversations with former players, coaches, cheerleaders, trainers, managers. And I'm so pleased to have a former teammate of mine and fellow quarterback at the same time, Tom Gray. How are you doing tonight, Tom?
I'm great, Bernard. And don't forget to add in the two best probably holders in the history of college football.
Oh, easily. Where was that award back then that they award now? I mean, come on now. Well, anyway, I asked Tom to come on because, as I said in the show description, every team needs those teammates who are kind of what I'll call the glue, the consummate teammate. They may be the best player on the team, they may be the last guy on the roster, or somewhere in between. But I mean this is a true compliment in that Tom was one of those guys for me and for so many of us when we were there during the Watson Brown years. And I know Tom was there the last couple of years of Coach MacIntyre's years, but Tom never ever hesitated to help out a teammate, answer questions, or just be there as somebody to hear something that you had to say. So Tom, I want to share that with you before we kick off our talk tonight.
Well, thanks, Bernard. And of that list, whether it's the best player or the last player, I'm much closer to the end of the last player description.
Well, and Tom being the pride of Radcliff, Kentucky, North Hardin High School's finest. Yeah. Tom is also extremely humble. If you guys who don't know him are going to find out. But I will tell you this, Tom, we already have some Commodores who you do know are rolling in. TP, Tony Piercy, is with us.
Hey, Tony.
Coach Shepard has rolled in.
Wow.
And Tyler Unzicker and some others. So welcome aboard, guys. Of course, I've got Tom Gray with us. And Tom, if you would, for folks who haven't been in contact with you in the last couple of years, catch up, tell folks what you're doing these days, talk about your beautiful family, and let's just get going.
Well, as much as I am a Commodore for life and could talk all day about that, the topic that trumps that by a landslide by far is my family. So yeah, I'll talk about that eagerly, gladly. Well, I live in the Atlanta area, northwest suburb, Cobb County, Powder Springs. I pastor a church there. It's called Mars Hill Community Church. I'm the senior pastor. It's a kind of medium-sized little community church, and nothing too fancy about it, but I love it. Couldn't be happier doing that. The other thing I've got going on, we just started this past year. We do I don't know how to categorize it under inspiration, life, whatever, life kind of help stuff. We do radio spots on a radio station in Atlanta, sports talk station, 680 The Fan. And the thing is that we call it This Stuff Matters. The tagline is helping you make the most out of what matters most. So I'm excited about those things, but you know, to me, it's my family, my wife and I just celebrated 25 years married. Awesome. This year. Yeah, she was a tennis player at University of North Carolina. I actually met her through her sister, which I know sounds strange on the when you first hear it. We were good friends at Vandy. So that's a good, met my wife indirectly through our days at Vanderbilt. We've got 3 kids. My oldest, I'm actually in Colorado Springs right now because I'm visiting him. He's a junior at the Air Force Academy. And then I've got 17-year-old son and daughter who are in high school, and they go to Mount Perrin Christian School in Kennesaw, where my wife works. She is the elementary school counselor there. And yeah, so I just, you know, I feel like I'm God's favorite kid and the most blessed guy on the planet. So it's good.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And TP reminded me, I'd forgotten this, that back in the day, and this is my question to you, do you still possess that silky smooth jump shot?
Oh, man, I appreciate you remembering that, Tony. You know what? We've got a little basketball hoop set up out in the cul-de-sac, and I love getting out there with my son and playing. We get out there and have some fierce, good games of horse and one-on-one sometimes. But It was one of the saddest days of my life, that day when I realized all the pickup games going on around town, after hours at the local high school gym and all of that, golly, I just either I got to go out there with a bunch of old guys and move slow, or or I got to not go out there. But yeah, basketball, I love it. Still get out there a little bit, but yeah, it's a sad day to not be able to
Well,
shoot it or move like you used to.
we all have our pickup games in our community centers or wherever in town. And I'm blessed. Now, we haven't played in almost a year, of course, because of the pandemic, but I've been playing with this same group for over 20 years. And Tom, the great thing is we kind of have an unwritten rule. You guard within your decade. And
That's good.
we'll let the 20-year-olds, they'll take the ball up and down the court, do their thing. I'll be over in the corner. If you need a three from the corner, I'm your guy, but do not ask me to guard a kid just out of college. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I remember the day when I stepped on the court and thought, you know what? My number one goal here today is not to get severely injured. Right? Winning comes somewhere further down the list.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, Tom, let's kick it way back into the early 80s, you growing up in Kentucky. Was football your favorite or your best sport, or basketball, tennis? What really got your attention as a kid?
It's interesting that TP mentioned basketball, because Kentucky's a basketball state, it was basketball crazed. And that's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to go somewhere else to play football. Back then, it wasn't the way it is now. I mean, you don't have, University of Louisville wasn't a good football team. And it wasn't until Hal Mummy came into University of Kentucky that they even had spring football in the state of Kentucky. So football was big time, kind of second tier compared to basketball. But I loved basketball. And if I had been better at basketball, I think I would have preferred probably to go to college and do that. But I loved football too, So when I knew football was my direction, it's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to not go to Kentucky. And even back when we were at Vandy was more of a basketball school, or known, basketball success. But it wasn't this ridiculous thing like, you could go to Kentucky. I just remember thinking, man, if I was a starting quarterback at Kentucky, I could be walking down the street one way, and the third string point guard could be walking down the street the other way. Everybody would know who he is. Nobody would even, blink an eye.
True. That's true. But Tom, I will tell you, somebody who everyone would recognize is number 15 has just joined us, Gromos. So our former teammate, John Gromos. OJ Fleming has joined us, Flavia Smith. Thank you, guys. We're here with Tom Gray. We're growing up in Kentucky. Tom has seen the benefits of maybe playing football when everybody else is playing basketball. Now, was your high school known for one sport or the other?
Definitely basketball. My sophomore year, and so my Brett Burrow, some of you guys back in those days would remember, he was our 6'10" center right before Will Purdue, began to dominate at Vandy in basketball. Well, Brett was from my high school. And so his senior year, it was him, the 6'10" center, 6'8" forward who played at Louisville. We had what was the number 5 ranked team in the nation that year. Wow. So, and I was a sophomore guy, but we got a lot of time because we'd always be so far ahead. So definitely a basketball school. Before I went to Vandy, we had one guy who ever made it in the pros, a linebacker who played for the Jets for a little bit. Certainly not a football factory at all, So it's kind of charting new territory for me at my high school back in the day.
Well, when was it during your high school years that it really kind of clicked with you or dawned on you, I think I can play in the next level and I want to get serious about this? And then the coaches started giving you some attention.
Yeah, I earned the starting position as a sophomore, and back in those days, there wasn't too many people, even at the college level, that were throwing the ball a lot, and we didn't really either at my high school. Maybe 10 to 12 passes a game, but even that sophomore year had enough passing kind of statistics that in the local couple county area, I hit the top of the list of the statistics then, and so got some, and I went to some camps, quarterback training kind of camps. And so got some recruiting attention, I guess right after my sophomore years when that started. And I knew I dreamed about it. I don't know how many guys, the rest of us Commodore Nation were this way, maybe a lot of us, but those are all the dreams I ever had as a kid, were to be, I wanted to be a running back, strangely enough. And like in Little League, there was never anybody to play quarterback, so I always had to do that. But my hero, this sounds crazy because he's had such a tough life after football, but O.J. Simpson was my idol. And that's who I wanted to be. Of course, not nearly as fast or as skilled on the field as he was, but.
Oh, but back in the day, he really, between him and then right after him was Walter Payton, and those two really set the bar for running backs. And then, Tony Dorsett, et cetera. But I can totally see that. But Tom, what schools started showing you some attention, and when did Vanderbilt come into the picture?
Yeah, Vanderbilt was there pretty early on. Coach Jacobs was the one hand on recruiting me. I remember he came to watch me play a high school basketball game. It was probably the worst basketball game I ever played. I couldn't remember they'd still want to recruit me after that. And by the time I got to be I think it was my junior year, he came to see. Anyway, they had me playing center. And that night we were playing Meade County that had two guys that were 6'8" each. And I'm just like a pinball bouncing between. I think I fouled out in the third quarter. Now I was just trying to hammer these guys the whole night, but Coach Jacobs did. The other schools that I looked at seriously were Indiana, Kentucky. I gave some thought to the academies, Army and Navy. My dad was a West Point grad. Those schools hadn't gone to the option quite yet. In fact, the coach at Army said, if we don't get the kind of quarterback we want, we're going to switch to the option. It was right about that time that was going down. Mm-hmm. So those were the main schools I considered. Some others I had some peripheral interest from, but pretty early on eliminated. Oh, and Duke, Coach Spurrier recruited me at Duke. And those were my final two, Duke or Vanderbilt, that I boiled it down to ultimately. So.
Wow, I never knew that. That's cool. But what won it over for Vanderbilt?
And even thinking back, I don't remember. I can't put myself back in my 16, 17, 18-year-old mind very easily. But for some reason, I wanted to go to an academic school. I guess there was something in me that realized that's a good way to go for your future. So Duke and Vanderbilt were in those camps. And then I think it was SEC versus ACC. Vanderbilt was the better football conference. It was closer to home, than Duke was. And it had I don't know, when I went to visit, it had a more welcoming kind of feel, at least in my experience of the two different schools.
Well, it's your family when you were growing up, were you all, if you rooted for college sports, was it Kentucky, Indiana, or was it Vanderbilt, Tennessee?
Yeah, none of, it's interesting because I just read our new coach that we just got, our cornerback coach, Coach Morgan. He said he went to this small town, single high school town right outside of an Army base. That's exactly what my high school was. My dad was career Army. So we didn't have deep roots in Kentucky. His last assignment just happened to be Fort Knox. And we lived in the town right outside of Fort Knox. That's where we are. So we didn't have a strong allegiance for any of those kind of more local regional colleges. My dad always was a big Army football guy, but I just appreciate, I got what I loved was offense. I loved offensive football. And wherever we lived, traveling, my dad would always take us to football games. Even when I was really little, we lived in Kansas, Fort Leavenworth. We'd go to the University of Kansas games. I mean, just everywhere we go, we'd go to games. And I remember going to see up to University of Louisville games to watch them play Florida State right about the point that they were beginning to emerge. And they were Bobby Bowden just heaving it all over the field. And nobody else was really doing that. And then same thing, they play University of Miami. So some of my favorite schools were, those kind of style schools. And I loved the BYU offense, I almost kind of rooted more for amazing offenses than a specific team.
Well, how could you not love watching Jim Kelly, then Bernie Kosar and all those guys sling it down the field back in that time period? Yeah. Oh, Tom, we got a whole bunch of folks, former teammates have rolled in. Wade Pretty.
Yay, Wade. All right.
Rock Batten. Dante Ferguson says to tell you hello.
Dante, what's up, man?
And Jim Arnold has joined us.
The legend. Jim Arnold, we'd stand on the field. He graduated before our group came in, but he'd be back there practicing. And I always felt like, I'm glad he's here practicing. And I know he's trying to mentor and he's trying to demonstrate for our punters, but I always felt a little like he might make them have a little complex because that ball came off of Jim Arnold's foot unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. It was just a rocket. Tom,
you may not remember this, but Coach Brown had me practice as like the pooch or the
I
short
do
punter.
remember that. Yeah.
And I can always remember thinking in my head, I hope Jim Arnold is nowhere near here. I knew he was in the pros. I never wanted him to critique or watch my technique because it was terrible. It was what it was. Kevin Dowling says to tell you hello.
Oh, Kevin. Hey, buddy. Oh, man.
Whole bunch of folks are rolling in tonight for Tom Grace. Tom,
What's amazing about this group, Bernard, you already know this, is these are just A-plus people, man. And so, yeah, to be associated with guys like that is part of the great lifelong value here.
well, there's a couple of questionable characters, but we're trying to identify them. If they'll come forward, it'll make it easier for us. But you're right. Most of these folks are they're awesome. It's so great to interact with them daily or weekly or however often they get into our football group. And I'm always on the lookout for photos and videos, memorabilia, just anything that from any time period. I think it's so cool. I really do. It's been fun.
That's great.
Tom, let's talk about your recruitment. Do you remember? Did you take? Well, let me back up. Did you come on an official recruiting visit? Who were your hosts? What do you remember about that time period?
Yeah, absolutely.
Remember, I will tell you this: the statute of limitations is long gone, and we're all just sharing right here.
Yeah, very.
So go ahead.
Whew, that's good. No, yeah, I did take an official visit. Absolutely. I'm trying to remember who I should remember who my host was. It really stood out, obviously. No, you know what was wild is I had the 5 visits you're allowed to have scheduled to different schools, and man, I had the tour of high-powered basketball games ready. I was going to go to Duke when Duke played UNC in Cameron Indoor. I had a trip to Kentucky planned when they were playing the Houston Cougars, and that was
Wow.
top 2 in the. But here's what happened. So I made my decision to go to Vanderbilt before I even took any of those trips.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was playing high school basketball, I canceled all of them but the Vanderbilt one, just because I knew where I was going. You know, my parents were real involved, and I've always been super thankful for that. So we had taken all these unofficial visits. You know, we'd gone to all the places already. So I kind of knew already, and didn't need all those official visits, and just took the one. I don't know why. I don't know why I don't have more distinct memories of that trip.
That's all right. It may come back to you, but I'll tell you, when I took my visit, it was in January. It was horrible snow, but Vanderbilt was hosting Kentucky. Kenny Skywalker was the big player for Kentucky that year. And I'll never forget this. And it forever, I didn't care or know about Kentucky basketball growing up as an Alabama fan in South Alabama, but he purposely did a windmill or a 360 dunk to end the game. You may have been there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that just set me so wrong. And anyway, that's just one of my memories from my visit. But so Vanderbilt really was what you decided. And talk to us a little bit, because things are so different now than they were. The modern athlete, I hate to sound like an old guy, but it was much simpler back then. We didn't deal with social media. We didn't deal with all this stuff. We just were what we were. We played the sports of the season, and you just enjoyed it, and then you moved on to the next one for the most part. But you've now signed, you've committed to come to Vanderbilt, and you're getting ready to come up that summer or that fall. After you graduated high school, when did you come up to Vanderbilt to start the first semester for you?
Yeah, I remember the date. It was August 10th, 1984. That's when we had to report. And, you know, just excited, but scared to death also. You know, these were all things that had no frame of reference to kind of hang what I was about to experience on any peg of comparison. Nobody I had known in high school, nobody in my family had ever gone to play a college sport, been recruited, gone through any of that kind of a process. So, and just feelings of inadequacy, probably a gazillion layers of that. Even I'm the guy from the small town. I'm a guy from Kentucky, whatever. You know, you just just showed up, and you're in a different world. And, you know, there was an adjustment period, no doubt, both for football, for college, for new town, big city. It was wild, you know, for me, but looking back, it was good. I needed to be stretched and challenged and humbled.
Well, you know, we all did. It's everybody makes that adjustment at their own pace. whether you immediately jump in as if you've been there for decades, or you never, on the complete opposite side of that, you never adjust, you don't like it, and you leave. But most of us are somewhere in that in between. Now, Tom, who was in your recruiting class?
Well, Dante, who's on here, trying to think who in Noel Wells, I remember, and because I think they had singled him out as somebody they were projecting to be a great wide receiver. Of course, he ended up playing DB, and that whole thing is kind of wild how that works over time too. You know, is who does what and how that compares to expectations on the front end. Of course, Mark Berry, one of my lifelong best friends, was in that group coming in. David Worm, Eric Snyder. I mean, I could go down the list. Chip Ezel was my college roommate, my freshman roommate, and Tom Fitz, played wide receiver from Cincinnati. He and I roomed together later. Byron Tolbert.
Yeah.
Joe Gentry. And I don't want to forget a bunch of. And you know what's amazing about that too, Bernard, is we had 30 guys, I think, 30 signees in that class. Huge class. And good players.
Mm-hmm.
Al Milton was the other quarterback with me, and he didn't. I think after a year and a half is when he dropped out. But out of those 30 guys, very few of us stayed and played 4 years. I forget the exact number, but very few of us actually graduated.
Mm-hmm.
Which I always looked at, and I know they've dealt with that since then. In whether you're in Pee Wee ball or high school or even pros, veterans help you win. And so we had an incredible recruiting class. I just wish there had been some of the mechanisms, of course I would have said, don't make me get tutoring, don't make us go to study hall. But by golly, if there'd been some things like that, like they do now to help the kids in the class, we could have, I think we had a class that could have really won a bunch of games, I think, with that development over several years,
And Tom, I don't think they really started that tutoring program in full, I think until the 90s. I think that when Derek Gragg came back to school, he could speak a little better to this, but I know that he helped to organize that. But it was several years later. But Tom, we got a whole bunch of other Commodores that have rolled in that I want to give you some shout outs. We got Gary Rogers. Thank you, Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Tom Ballman, CP Carl Parker.
Yeah.
And TR St. Charles. So thank you guys for all rolling in to say hey to Tom for a little bit. Tom, I can remember I was 2 years behind you recruiting wise. You were on your years were the tail end of Coach MacIntyre, his last 2 seasons, I believe, and then the first 2 seasons with Coach Brown. But when you're a freshman that fall, and I've had conversations on here with several of the players who played in the game, but the fall of '84, you guys came to Tuscaloosa and snapped Alabama's, 28 or 30 game homecoming streak. And growing up as an Alabama fan, I was bummed out. Vanderbilt, I didn't know anything other than they were the team that nobody lost to. Little did I know that a year and a half later, these guys would be my brothers and my teammates. But Chuck Scott tells some great stories. Kurt Page tells some great stories from that game. But your freshman year, did you redshirt? Did you travel? Did you play? What talk to us a little bit about that experience?
Totally redshirted, and did not make that trip. Loved every moment of that win. That was huge. I mean, Carl Parker going up over the top on the goal line, and from Carl Parker to Kurt Page, who I looked up to, and Chuck Scott. These are guys that imprinted and affected my life, not just the football part of it, but those are amazing guys. That was an amazing team. I think we started 4-0, ranked top 25. That was, and then, be an interesting post-mortem to diagnose what all went south after that. But what an incredible team. In fact, 2 of the guys on that team were part of the reason I went to Vanderbilt, both Kentucky guys. So it was Will Wolford, the offensive tackle, maybe one of the best offensive tackles ever to play the game of football. And then Kermit Sykes out of Lexington. He's our cornerback. And I remember as a sophomore in high school going to whatever their version back in the day of the Kentucky high school all-star game was, that they played at then the fairgrounds in Louisville. And I remember each player they'd introduce and they'd tell where they were going to college. And it stood out to me because there weren't very many that Will Wolford, he's committed to go to Vanderbilt University. And Kermit Sykes, I mean, these are two of the best players on the field that day. And of course, instrumental in beating Alabama that day. They were both going to Vanderbilt. And I remember even the crowd around was a little bit like, huh, that's kind of weird. And that helped put that on my radar. Wow, there's some extraordinary players going there. And of course, it was no fluke to beat Alabama that day. That was a good team. And they had good players.
They did, but Vanderbilt certainly was the better team. I remember watching, I think it was Mark Wohlers and so many of those other guys with a goal line stand against maybe Bobby Humphrey trying to score inside the 10. But that was a great win. Yeah.
Great offensive line, Bernard. Those guys could move people, Rob Monaco, and oh man, those guys were good.
Yeah, Carl says, I knew who you meant. You mentioned Carl Parker going over the top, but it was Goo Baby.
Carl Woods, I said Carl Parker. Yeah, Carl Woods going over the top.
Yeah, I've been trying to get in touch with Goo Baby. I want to get him on the show sometime, and I know that'd be a fun conversation.
Yes.
But Tom, let's talk about the transition academically.
Yeah.
You were talking about it was a small high school in town you came from. Some kids just never clicks with them. But how did you make that adjustment academically?
Painfully. There's nothing wrong with my high school. I had great teachers. So that I wasn't ill prepared in that sense. My struggle was internal motivation, internal discipline, internal organization. That my second semester freshman year, trying to get my second semester of Spanish out of the way. And it's 5 days a week, like one of those rare classes where it's not 3 days a week. And it was 8 a.m. And it was in this building. I don't even remember. It was like the 5th floor of this freezing cold building with the pipes, running along the ceiling. I'm making excuses, but, and it was like the biggest winter Nashville had in forever. And there was far too many mornings that when 8 o'clock rolled around and there's snow and it's freezing, I don't think I want to go to Spanish today. And I made a D. Yeah, in a 5-hour class. It wasn't too good. So we had to take advantage of summer school, and we had to learn how to discipline a little bit and organize time a little better. So some adjustments for sure. But but
you figured it out. Clearly, you at some point it clicked with you. Whether you figured out the right classes that interest you, or you just knew the right professors to take, or whatever it was, you figured it out. Now, at the end of my freshman year, I went home for that summer. Mm-hmm. And within about a week, I was ready to come back. I missed all the guys and hanging out and working out. What did you do after your freshman years that summer? Where'd you go?
I think I was home. Like, weren't there like 2 summer sessions, basically? I mean, you could do a Maymester. One year I actually did Maymester, but then basically a June-ish. I don't know. There was two blocks. I think I was always in one of those summer school sessions. So including freshman year. I don't remember which one, but probably the one closer to the fall semester.
And back during that time period, did you know that you wanted to have ministry as your profession, or what were you leaning toward at that time?
Yeah.
Because that could be all over the board. When you're 18, 19 years old, you have no idea what you want to do. But some kids have a plan. They know what they want to do, and that keeps them on track.
Right. Yep. That was not me. What's weird, even looking back, is I see a lot of immaturity in me back then, but there were some mature markers. Mm-hmm. I don't totally understand in retrospect, but one of those was they recruited me back in that day. I mean, basically everybody was redshirting, or as many as they could. That was the strategy. And so part of what they sold to me was, hey, we've got this new thing going on at Vanderbilt where you could if you get accepted into this accelerated program, you can get a BA and an MBA through our business school in 5 years. Usually that would have been a 6-year thing. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, there's a gazillion ways to get an MBA, but then it was a unique program. Mm-hmm. And since it looked like I was going to get redshirted anyway, I thought, that's of interest to me. So I did have that in mind without really having any idea what I wanted to do career-wise. My grandfather had been a pastor. I was good friends with the pastor of the church I grew up in. So I had familiarity with that, but never anything in me that had a desire to do that as a career or whatever. That was much later. but I would say my spiritual growth really kicked in at Vanderbilt, and guys like Chuck Scott, he was the leader of the FCA as a senior. Here's this All-American wide receiver. And he and a few of the other guys really took me under their wing, me and Mark Berry, Wade, some of these other guys, and really poured into us. Great fellowship and kind of teaching and spiritual nurture, even with Carl Parker and other guys along the way. So there were the beginnings of what now is what I do, but certainly no vision for it or sense that that's the direction I was going at that point.
Maybe at that time you might not have quite recognized it, but eventually it found you, you found it.
Yeah.
And clearly you've thrived in it for these many years. Tom, I had the fortune of playing for Watson my entire time I was at Vanderbilt. But what happens at Vanderbilt, unfortunately, from time to time is guys will play for 2 or even 3 coaches at times. And you had Coach Mack to start with, and I want to say his son was Mike on the squad when you got there.
He was in my recruiting class.
Oh, I didn't realize, didn't appreciate that because I don't think that when I got there in '86, he may have left when his dad left or quit playing football.
He went to Georgia Tech when his dad left. So, and he finished out playing free safety there.
Gotcha. All right. Well, what I want to talk to you about is that transition from Coach Mack to Coach Brown. I assume Coach Brown had conversations with all of the guys on the squad when he came in. I know he came in very late into the recruiting season. It was probably December of '85 or November, December of '85 coming out of Rice. I was not on their radar until that time period. And I remember Coach Brown saying, I just got here. I got to sign a quarterback. You're my guy, that kind of talk. Mm-hmm. But I want you to share some of that. What was the feelings when Coach Mack left and Coach Brown came in and that transition time period?
Yeah, so it was, and I want to use my words carefully because, and maybe a lot of people have similar, or we all have similar in the sense that it's varied maybe also, if that makes any sense, which it might not. But, because you have affection for a coach, but you have challenges with that coach also, and maybe some personal, ways you didn't feel as valued or whatever. And Coach Mack was like that for me. I loved Coach Mack. Mm-hmm. That's part of why I wanted to go to Vanderbilt. Some of his reputation of integrity and even as a Christian man and those kinds of things. And yet, man, I had some personal things I didn't love about Coach Mack. Just, I don't, anyway, I won't get into all of those things, but so to me, as much as I loved personally Coach Mack, I was fired up, thrilled, excited for Watson Brown to come. I felt like this was going to be good for the team. I felt like it could be an open door to be good for me personally as a player. He was, and a lot of people at that time, the last real success Vandy had was the bowl game in '82, and Watson was the offensive coordinator at that time.
That's right.
Of course, then he had success at Cincinnati. They beat Penn State. Then he went and had success at Rice. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there was a lot of excitement about Watson Brown coming. And, of course, this is going to be offense central and all of that kind of thing. So I thought, well, that'd be good. I'm excited to see what happens. Maybe I'll get a chance with him. Bottom line, I didn't feel like Coach Mack was giving me much of a chance. So I was excited for that. And then, and interestingly, I'm a pastor, Christian guy and all that. And part of what an appeal to me initially as a recruit with Coach Mack was in this Christian persona that he had or reputation, which I don't have. It was correct. That's who he was, a tremendous man. But Watson Brown, even though I guess he's a Christian man and go to church and all that, but he wasn't as nearly as known for that. That wasn't part of the public persona of him to the extent that Coach Mack had been. And yet I felt like what I appreciated about Watson Brown so much was he was always very straightforward with me. I mean, I never for a moment felt like he was trying to appease, my concerns or something. He was just straight up honest. And I loved that. Of course, he never, I didn't earn the starting position under him either, which was you certainly hope to do. But man, it was good. So I appreciated playing for him, and it was challenging for sure. Having two different guys and being in a transition period is always going to be difficult. But I loved both those guys, and I really loved playing for Watson there those last.
All of that time period in the 80s, obviously it way predated the internet, and it was much harder to get information about things. But when I was starting to be recruited, I went and researched Coach Brown and where he had been and the type of offenses. And then I immediately went to the Vanderbilt roster. I wanted to see how many quarterbacks were there. Of course, Smuggs was there, Ratcher was there, Gromos, Tim Richardson. I was like, oh my gosh, look at all these guys. They're all over the board. Some big talent who's there. But I was excited because I knew he threw the ball. And I knew that he had, there was a little bit of run that was involved. Anyway, the long story short was I was excited like you should be. I just wanted to come in and try to compete. But I was immediately redshirted like you were redshirted your freshman year. But I also know you got to play some other positions at different times. And I want to talk about that for a minute or two. So share a little bit about, I know you played a little RB, you played on some special teams.
Yeah. And so, early on, I guess my second year, the redshirt freshman year, it was clear I was like so far down that depth chart of highly talented guys you just mentioned and others, that I was like, either I'm going to transfer or I better, I just wanted to do anything I could to get on the field. So I told the coach that, I was on kickoff return. That's when and here's what they said. Here it is funny, Bernard. They said, okay, we need a backup holder because Mark Ratcher was the holder and the starting quarterback my second year. And I said, oh, yeah, I'll try out for that. So I'm working on that. So I got to be the backup holder. And then they're saying, oh, we need a third string long snapper because we had Tim Green and John Short, two of our other guys, two linemen in my class, who are great long snappers. I said, I'll try out, for third string long snapper. And sure enough, I'm a third string long snapper. I'm doing anything I could to get on the field. Like, I want to play football. And sure enough, we're playing at Kansas my sophomore year. Ratcher's the quarterback. And by the way, speaking of, you want to get good guys on here to talk, he and I are close friends in Atlanta now. And his wife and my wife walk together. Like it's very cool.
I'll hit you up after this.
Yeah. And Ratcher, his life story is worth hearing. It's extraordinary. But so Ratcher dislocates his hip. We're playing the Kansas Jayhawks. He's out. I'm like, okay, I'm going in. Whenever we have a field goal attempt next, I'm the guy. Next thing I look over, Tim Green and John Short are both sitting on the bench injured. Both long snappers. They like one of them's got an ankle or something. I'm like, oh, wait. I start getting the coach because I'm sure no coach has put two and two together here.
Right.
We get to go on for a field goal. Technically, I'm supposed to snap and hold. So anyway, somehow Tim Green, I think it was, managed to limp out there and snap, and I held. That was my first play ever, And then junior year, Watson comes in, my third year. And like you said, tons of quarterbacks. And after, I forget if it was after spring or when it was, and there's that one magazine or program that had all of us on the cover, you and I and Eric at that point, and Gromes.
Oh, how could I forget EJ? My gosh.
And Gromes and Tim Richardson, I think, were all on that cover together. And after that, basically, Watson, I appreciate it, sat down and he says, look, we got 5 quarterbacks. I can't work with 5 quarterbacks. I got to take quarterback development seriously. And he moved Eric to wide receiver for that fall, moved me to running back. Mm-hmm. And so I backed up, honestly, 2 great running backs, Everett Crawford, Rodney Barrett. And so they kind of threw me in here and there. That's when I got in a couple of times. Truthfully, I probably should have never gotten in. Those guys were good, and I was not as good. But caught a pass against Alabama that year, got a concussion, claim to fame from Derek Thomas in that game. I was
going to say, share a little bit about that play when you and old DT got the bang heads.
And, so one of the amazing things was that nobody knew about Derek Thomas before that game. So it was Cornelius Bennett was the guy. And so he was the guy we were worried about, this all-American linebacker just all over the field, knocking everybody over, wreaking havoc. Well, he was injured and out. Oh, but Derek Thomas was his replacement. And I forget how many sacks he got. And I know he blocked a punt, returned it for a touchdown. Yeah, something crazy. All of a sudden,
Ratcher was, oof.
Yeah. But one time it was a third and short. and I don't know, Ratchet throws me the ball over on the sideline kind of, and I'm just running down the sideline trying to dive for the first down marker. And literally it wasn't a very hard hit, but Derek Thomas comes just like you come through with your arms to wrap up. And I think his arm just hit me in just the right spot, somewhere on the side of the head. You get not even a hard hit in the right spot. Something happens to your brain. Kind of was a real kind of, I don't know, awakening about how fragile our brains can be. And so yeah, it was a little bit cuckoo there for a day or so, but
Little did you know that one Hall of Famer got replaced by another Hall of Famer, and you get to meet him head on. Tom, I want to talk about two very important figures at Vanderbilt during our time period. Well, one was during both of your time period. I want to talk about Brad Bates. I want to talk about Doc Crease. Doc Crease was gone by the time I was there, but I know he had very important roles. We all know about what happened and leaving and all of that, but I know that Doc was important to you for a while. So share a little bit about Doc Crease.
yeah, so he was one of those guys. You talked about the adjustments you have to make when you step in as a freshman. He was at the top of the list of scary things that you have to adjust to. Basically, we're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy, kinds of awakenings. Here's Doc Crease, loud, larger than life, and you're going to get bigger, faster, stronger together, and whether you like it or not.
Right.
And this whole new world. But then he was also simultaneous that guy that made it doable, made the transitions and adjustments. I don't know. After all of that, Bark, man, he was the encourager and the guy that was going to follow through on his words with his actions and get you there and help you. So even those off season, that year, the off season was 6 a.m. workouts. That was extreme. January, getting over there to Magoogan and, just trying to make you throw up kind of workouts, so, and then I'd go back and go to bed and not go to Spanish class, but, but so, some of those kind of making you a man in some ways and teaching you things about team, as awful as the things that were going on that weren't legal and right. And obviously we can't justify or say anything good about those activities, but there were good things, and his influence and apart from those bad things was very good. Some of the success, probably a lot of the success that we had in those years there was attributable to him. And then of course, Brad Bates comes in and he was a leader, an inspirational figure. And I felt like, this is weird, like he didn't cross any boundaries in friendship. He was an authority figure. He was a coach, but I felt like he was my friend. I like to run. I like to be in shape. He liked to run. We'd go running together in the summers. We'd go these long runs around Nashville, and somebody I really looked up to and appreciated. He was inspiring to me. In fact, later, and I haven't talked to him in a couple of years now, but he's a guy I've kept in touch with some over the years. And when he was the AD at Boston College and things like that.
I want you to come back and be in the audience in 2 weeks, because Coach Bates is going to be my guest.
Oh, that's awesome. Good.
Henry Beeland next week, Coach Bates in 2 weeks. We got some awesome guests coming up. And guys, I'm talking with Tom Gray, and we're plowing through the 80s and some awesome times. And no athlete really wants to recognize when it's his time or her time to transition to whatever's next in life. Yeah. And it's the athletic pride in us. Yeah. And I can always compete. I've got one more play or game or season in me. And what was it, or when was it for you when you realized I've kind of run my course here? I'm ready to move on to the next phase in my life. Was there a moment, or was there kind of an awakening time? What was it for you, if there was one?
Yeah, it's probably a series of moments over time. I never stopped hoping that I could play all those years there at Vandy. And after that, my third year playing running back most of the year, at the end of the year, Coach Brown, he first moved Eric back to quarterback from wide receiver. Then he moved me back to quarterback from running back, and stayed in a backup role that whole next year. And then worked as a GA for the year after that. Actually just a student coach while finishing up the MBA program. But then I went to coach ball. I mean, I love football, and the question you're asking isn't connected just to our competitive drive that defines us, or at least defines a part of our manhood, but I think probably all of us, our identity was inseparably linked to being football players. How we saw ourselves, how the world around us saw us. this is Bernard Domberg, quarterback. This is, this is Dante Ferguson, tight end, or whatever. You kind of, and you start to say, well, that's who I am. And it gets really deeply connected to your identity. So it makes that transition when you're no longer that anymore, it makes it very difficult because and I think probably all of us could.
Because when you stop playing, it's like, well, so what am I now?
Right. Who am I?
Yeah. Who am I now?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. And so, I was coaching football. I loved it. I was coaching down at Livingston University. It's now University of West Alabama is the name of it. D2 school, Tyreek Hill, alum from there. I was under Sam McCorkle. He was the head coach for those 2 years. I was the quarterbacks and receivers coach. He had been a coach at Vandy my freshman year. So that's how I had known him before he took the head job. Yeah. A great guy, loved him. And so while I was there coaching, of course, I'm working out and doing everything. I'm working with my quarterbacks down there as a coach. I'm thinking, I can still play this game. This is ridiculous. Is there somebody that can get me a tryout in the CFL or that, and so that I had little, probably ridiculous, in retrospect, ridiculous notions there, but it's that thing, man, because it's so deep in you and your love for it and its connection to your identity. And I went for a tryout. I think it was called the World League of American Football. It was one of those leagues they tried. Yeah. They had this open tryout deal at Legion Field, in Birmingham. And I went to that day. And I think I did all right. I threw the ball pretty well, but not, at that point you gotta be Cam Newton compared to all the other candidates out there throwing the ball around. Yeah. And I of course was not that. And so, you know what, I think it's probably time to start trying to figure out a new life and a new identity and a new path. So, and it's been good.
And those years that we're in college, it's like 18 to 23, 22 years of age. They're growth years. You find out more about yourself. You figure out, hopefully, where you want to transition, what's the next phase, and those types of things. But we learn those life lessons that whether we recognize them then or we recognize them 20 years later, they typically have occurred when you're in high school or college or just afterward. So what I'd love to get from your perspective, just from all of your experiences, and now that you have a son at the Air Force and you've got two on the way, what kind of things have you shared that you want to share with us that you learned back in the day that translate to even now for your children?
Well, and I think the question maybe, Bernard, is pointing to the tremendous value of participating in sports and participating in team sports. Even my son, who's here at the Air Force Academy, his primary sport ended up being swimming, which is more of an individual sport, which has value too, for sure. The discipline, the hard work, and the competitive fire, all those things. Sure. But there's something too about the team lessons, and there's something crazy wild about the uniqueness of football. From the toughness required, from, I don't know, how your lack of toughness can be exposed to the, just the, oh man, the camaraderie in that kind of an intensely violent environment. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it is. I mean, you go out on the field, you're risking injury to go out there and do that, and you choose to do it, and so does everybody you're in the huddle with, and so it's part of why I think, Bernard, I don't know if you do or any of our other guys that we share this life and these memories with, but I don't know if you still dream that you're on the football field. I'm 50. I turned 55 years old. Not all the time, but every now and then I have a dream that I'm playing football. I'm out there doing something. I'm like, what? This is so deeply ingrained, but so in some way too, not only those memories and the impact it makes, but the lessons. And that's my message to the kids. I mean, you gotta work through hard stuff. You gotta put others ahead of yourself. You gotta show up for practice when you don't feel like it. I mean, these things are what make you successful in life. You gotta submit to your authorities.
You got to go to Spanish class at 8 o'clock in the middle of January when it's snowing out.
For example, yeah. Or you got to retake it the next summer, and that's right. So the lessons are, if you're willing to learn, if you're teachable, the lessons are huge. And so as our kids, we've tried, and I think every parent is this way, man. It is every sports parent who played a sport. My wife being a tennis player, not to make sports bigger than it should be or ought to be in your life. And yet work hard at it to be as good as you can and learn what you can from it. And if you can, get something out of it, great, but don't make it your God. It's not God. But learn the lessons that you can learn from it.
And it's you're so right. It's easy to remember what happened on the field, whether it was good or bad. I made this play, I missed that play, whatever. But what I have always thought is so much more important for my memories is the friendships off the field.
Yes.
It's the time in the locker room. It's goofing around on campus. It's going to get pizza and beer, just hanging out with the guys and sharing a little bit about life. And even now, I bet you're thinking, or you could probably rattle off half a dozen to a dozen friends from back in your Vanderbilt days who you're still in contact with, most notably Ratcher. You probably see him or talk to him each week or each day. But it's those life friendships that will never go away. And they're there. You could pick up 3 years, 10 years, 20 years later, and Tony Piercy's going to remember whatever it is you just said about something y'all hadn't even talked about since that event. Right. And I think that's what's so beautiful about being teammates.
Yeah, that's right. That's well said, Bernard. Exactly right. It's huge. Yeah.
Well, Tom, I sure appreciate you taking us down your journey and memory lane tonight. Some awesome stories and life lessons, and it's been so great to catch up with you this evening.
Well, I appreciate all that you're doing to help connect this extended family, and so it means a lot. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, and I'm going to charge you that when you get home, if you've got pictures, jerseys, helmets, whatever you may have in that closet or storage unit, pull it out, snap some photos, either send it to me or put it in our group. You can share it with everybody. But thank you, Tom, for spending some time with me tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bernard. And love you guys, everybody that has been a part of it tonight.
Well, there's a whole bunch of great comments sharing some love with you, Tom, in here that you need to come and see. But guys, every Thursday night, conversations with Commodores. And like I said, I've got Henry Beelan next week, Coach Bates in 2 weeks, and on and on and on. And this is a lot of fun. But just remember, be safe and anchor down.
Amen. All right.